So good morning to the Caron YouTube audience from Magic Mountain on Easter Sunday, April 4th, 2021. Among the strangest of years for many of us, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you, and also to welcome our Caron in-person assembly and those who are watching around the campus on live stream. Feeling a little anxious and tremendously privileged and excited to be here with you, and also moved by the sharing of the music that those of us who were here just were bathed with. And that's the right metaphor. Baptism is the historic practice of the Christian churches, especially on Easter Sunday. And the baptism signifies this thing. What is that thing? That's kind of what I really want to talk about today. I have a topic for the Sunday that came up naturally in the rotation of my topics for this particular Sunday, which made me laugh because it's like the perfect topic for Easter Sunday. But it's served up, like many of you will find if you continue on this journey, when you open your daily reflections or whatever devotional you use, a curious, weird way in which the reading for the day will be especially spot on for whatever's going on. Anyway, today's topic is new birth. And I don't know what that means to you. I do know I did not come to the shore of recovery seeking new birth. I did not like show up at an AA meeting and go, hey, y'all do new birth around here? That's not what I came with a very specific awareness of alcohol and its influence on my life. I think somewhere in the background I had a notion that the cocaine, marijuana, crystal meth, and other things were not necessarily helpful either. But it was the alcohol and the imploding of my liver and the destruction of my relational world that really brought me to my knees. And when I came to recovery, my ask of recovery was a simple one. Like, can you help me tolerate not drinking? That was my thought. I really thought it was going to be miserable not drinking. I was pretty sure I could not sustain not drinking. And I thought, like, I don't know how those of you who actually stay not drinking, like, brave the world, because celebrations without alcohol and suffering without alcohol, I just couldn't even, like, think of it. But I did not come here for theology, for religion, for spirituality, for new birth. Like, I was like, no, like, that's not why I'm here. And I was in the recovery community a few months when I was struggling terribly. I was really uncomfortable. And somebody had given me the AA Big Book like the first week I was here. I told that story some time ago. Anyway, I want to stay on track with my message, but I had read the AA literature, the first 5 chapters, which I was instructed to read like in my first couple of weeks. So several months in, I was like, whoa, I had emotions that were suddenly swamping me, and they were included insecurity, shame, sadness, guilt, grief, all kinds of that I had pushed away and tried to suppress with my alcohol. And now, as this stuff was coming up, I was getting progressively more and more uncomfortable with my sobriety. And by that time, I had become a kind of constituent of the recovery community that is actually Narcotics Anonymous, but I was also straddling and starting to look at AA. And I don't remember exactly where or who it was, but I remember I was talking to someone and I was like, did you find your recovery even more difficult than your drinking? Because I was really on that fence. I was like, my drinking was miserable, but this is awful. And they were like, have you worked a spiritual program? And I'm like, don't start with that. So that was like the beginning of my move out of my dogged atheism and my fence around spirituality. Was somebody suggested I go back, and they were like, well, have you read the book? And I'm like, yeah, I read the book in my first week. They're like, well, I want to read it again. And when I went back and I started reading the AA literature, suddenly I was like, oh no, I've been tricked, because somebody changed the book and every other page says God, and I'm not here for that. So then my dilemma was, do I run the other way, or actually I was managing to stay abstinent one day at a time, but so I dipped my toe, another baptismal metaphor, in the water of like spiritual curiosity. And that sustained me on a journey, so that by the time I was 3 years into my recovery, I remember telling my spouse at the time that I was thinking about selling our small company and going into seminary, and she laughed and thought like, well, yeah, next week you'll want to be a firefighter, that it was a sort of a childhood or adolescent like phase, and I'd get over it. So it was 2 years later that I finally did exactly what I had said and embarked on a journey of theological education and pastoral ministry. And I stand before you now as a person who went from the atheist to this seeker follower and then a servant. And I had the privilege of serving as a pastor in churches for 15 years. I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I still make mistakes all the time. But it was an extraordinary experience, and I'm very privileged to have been given that role. And as I was functioning as a student pastor, I had to get educated about Christian theology, which I mean, how hard can it be? We teach it to kids. And suddenly I discovered that Christian theology is very, very much a rabbit hole. Once you go in and try to sort it out and have it make sense, it's full of mystery and paradox and sadly legacies of misuse. There are people who have waged war using a gospel of love. There are people who have argued for slavery based on witnesses to enslavement in these texts that I think are more metaphorical, whatever. But I was the person, you've heard me say this, those of you who have been here a little while, I was a slave and made free. I was blind and given sight. I was captive, and I had my own story about how I had come out of the darkness into the light. I'd been dead and now was alive. And none of those meant that my eyes didn't work. It was that my sight, which was fogged, was not. So I was approaching the project of theology from this allegorical and mythical and metaphysical and symbolic runway. And my professors wanted me to run a certain gauntlet that my seminary training involved, which was that each one of us who was on this particular journey, by the end of the third year, would have to be able to explain our personal theology, how we had figured out how to make sense of the story. If you were Pacific Islander or Asian American, how were you going to make sense of the story? If you were African American, how are you going to make sense of the story? If you were heterosexual white guy, how are we going to make sense of the story? In the context of other people from other contexts who are making sense of the story. And how did it relate to your personal life? And actually stand up and bear witness to your faith. So that particular school had I know, sorry, it's long-winded, but the school had part of the gauntlet was to wrestle with two concepts. And one was what they called new birth, which was this idea of almost, for Bill Wilson, it becomes the white light experience, where in his story, he's zapped and suddenly knows he will never drink again. And many people in Alcoholics Anonymous and the other recovery movements yearn for this quick fix me and help me know it's done. And then the other concept that the Wesleyans wanted me to wrestle with was justification, which is this idea, it's a very heady idea, but that the conversion of a person from non-Christian to Christian meant somehow getting right with yourself, getting right with God, and getting right with your community. Our singer, which the YouTube audience missed, but bore witness a little bit to this idea of a kind of redemption. And not a redemption as if you cash in a ticket, but redemption in which people have reason to see you in a very different light than they saw you before. So a new way of living, not just a magic wand, bing, you're changed. And both of those are part of the witness in the history of faith, not just in Christianity, but in Hinduism and Buddhism and Judaism and Islam. Like the proliferation of spring festivals in the northern hemisphere and the way they are celebrated in the various wisdom traditions of the world all bear testimony, which the earth itself bears testimony to, as the leaves fall, and now in spring we see the daffodils and the Bradford pears and the cherry blossoms start to come. Life comes back, and this rebirth, renewal, fertility, regeneration stuff that we see in nature actually can happen in human beings too. And I'm here in front of a group of people who might be wondering if it can actually happen to you. You may not believe that you could have an Easter. Like, you may not believe that you could be redeemed. You may not believe that your tragic rearview mirror story warrants and would deserve people to welcome you and say, we are so glad you are here and you are one of us, and don't let your worst day define who you are. But I believe that. I came to believe in this. And so my Easter message is informed a little bit by the guy whose photo is over there on the wall. I know those of you who are on live stream and on the camera won't see it, but Father Bill Holtberg's picture is on the wall here. He was my mentor when I came to Caron after my 15 years of church ministry. And at that time, I was really into doing Easter like in a big way. And I was like, I wonder what we're going to do with chapel with Easter. And I was like, should we get lilies and bring in trumpets and all that sort of stuff? And Father Bill was influenced by his experience of being in Vietnam and Korea in the battlefields. And what he said to me gently is, Jack, when I was overseas in the middle of war and I was with soldiers on holidays, if I brought the holiday, it would make it worse for them, not better. So we're going to dial Easter down. We're not going to do the big, and we're going to dial Christmas down, and we're going to dial all that sort of stuff because, and this was Father Bill, and Father Bill stands on a really good historical, liturgical thing. He says, I'll tell you a little secret, Jack. Every Sunday here is Easter. And that's my message. That's the whole deal. Even though today we mark it and we celebrate it in a certain way, Easter happens here all the time. And the big question I want to offer you is, first of all, will you receive it? It's here, it's in the air, it's in the sauce, it's in the... And I don't necessarily have a formula to tell you exactly how to make the woo-woo happen or whatever. I can tell you that the only formula I know is the justification formula, the process of working the steps, which will make of you a better human being. But there's a sizzle that happens somewhere along, and it can happen before you do the steps, it can happen while you're doing the steps, it can happen after you make your first pass through the steps and on your way through the second time or whatever. There's both a woo! What was that? Great old movie, Blues Brothers, where all of a sudden Belushi gets, struck by the light and does catapults up the center of the church. That is something I think most of us as addicts would crave. I want that, But the hard piece of news I have to tell you is that what makes that real is if we live a transformed existence coming out of that. And what makes it false is if we proclaim ourselves as redeemed and then inflict harm again. So Easter's a tough invite. A part of you wants that. Perhaps you might really want the zap and the sizzle. But I have to ask you to understand, it comes with a call to move into truth and honesty and humility and integrity and service and sacrifice and amends and sponsorship and community. It's not a solitary thing. That's the other thing, is do you want to become one of a community who lives according to a new code? And do the people in AA or NA live that code perfectly? Definitely not. But do they understand over time that there is a code and a set of expectations? Absolutely. I mean, I would love to tell you that when you get sober and you join AA, there's no more, marital infidelity, there's no more lying, cheating, stealing, there's no more. But it occurs to me to point out, like several years ago, we had an iPad stolen from the closet here, and those of us who realized it was gone were like, oh my God, can you believe an addict stole something? And honestly, we were indignant because it's like, hey, it's chapel, and this is a sacred place for us, but you gotta look at who it is that we become, and we become it little by slowly. So, I do mean to say Happy Easter to you in a quiet way. And to say that Easter happens here all the time. And this is the end of Passover also. So Passover's narrative is one of captivity that ends in deliverance and rescue, that opens onto promise and new possibility after terrible struggling and suffering. It's a great story for those of us who are in addiction and making the turn. It's like the perfect time. Last Sunday was the Festival of Holi in Hinduism, and we'll have a Hindu prayer today. And the Native American traditions would have paid attention to the vernal equinox that was also last weekend. And what they would mine from that is the reality all around us of regeneration, rebirth, renewal, and new life. And that's why we're here. Teasing at the edges of it, beginning to find it. I do know that if you don't seek it, you will not discover it. If you reject even the possibility of it, you will close your mind to the hope that is here in this place. So if you are a person who comes in here and treatment doesn't work and AA is stupid and all the people and the interventionist is just out here to make money, you have just closed the door on a miracle. And some of our most extraordinary miracle stories began that way here, but decided somewhere along in week 2 or 3 to change their mind and open their hearts, and like the Grinch, find out that, or Scrooge, or I should think of an Easter metaphor story for that, which there are, I'm sure, many. I'm the Easter metaphor for that. Let's not only proclaim resurrection, rebirth, renewal, and fertility, but ask for it in ourselves and affirm it when we see it in one another. And I think that's our claim and call today. Thank you, Marty.